Hi, Ovidio.
Hi, Jiri.
Thanks for coming today. How you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. Just finished up a bunch of stuff throughout the day, and yeah, excited for the discussion.
For the discussion. All right, before we will start, would you mind to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I am Ovi Stoica. I've been doing professional software development for 8, 9 years now, and I've done Clojure for the last 4 years. Currently, my main occupation is doing voice AI agents with Clojure, and in the past I've done a lot of UI work and mobile development with technologies as React Native.
Yeah,
So
yeah. When
that's
you
in big lines.
that you do AI work with Clojure, what exactly is it, and how can you do this?
Well, it's mainly so I specialize in voice AI agents. It's basically things like for customer support where you do inbound agents where a person can choose to speak with an AI instead of wait 15 minutes to talk to a human, or outbound calls, or for example there are companies that have very automated processes that, let's say you are late on paying a bill, they will dispose a agent to call you, hey, you are late on the bill. And studies show that people are more likely to pay with this type of intervention, even if it's AI. So that's mainly how I do it. The technology is why Clojure? Because initially I wanted to use Clojure for this. I did not want to use Python just because it's a hassle for me, at least in my personal preference, to use Python for this. And I developed a library, it's open source, called VoiceFL, that helps you kind of compose the required technologies to build a voice agent. Basically, you need a transport, which can be telephony, WebRTC, or even your local microphone, let's say, and capture that as a stream of audio, take that to a transcriptor, which is usually a commercial transcriptor. You have many providers for this. And then the result from that transcription, you take it to a text-based LLM like ChatGPT, but you would use something faster. There are more providers for that. And the output from the text-based LLM, you would stream that. That would stream tokens. You would assemble a sentence, and once you have a sentence, even if this one is still generating, you would take that to a text-to-speech engine, which would produce audio that you give back to the user. That's in big lines how you would do something like this. Of course, you need a lot more. How should I say, bits and pieces to make this process more efficient and also make it more reliable, because the more complex an agent's task is, the more it is likely that it will hallucinate. So you need to put a lot of guardrails in place to keep it on the right path. For
Yeah,
example, in this scenario, I developed also a scenario manager, I call it, which is basically a tree structure of conversations where it's the start point. This is your very small little task here, like greet the user, for example. If the user ask the user if he has time, and if the user says no, go to point 2, which is end the call, or go to this node, which is continue with this point, and this one will have 2 conditionals, and it's basically a tree. But it shows way better results if the agent has a very small task instead of having a very complex thing and just moving it from point to point through a function call.
yeah,
On top of that, there are things like having another agent just listening to the output of the LLM, basically to the whole conversation, and its whole job is to see if the original agent just derails. And
yeah.
if it sees at some point, okay, it's going off the rails, just call a function to move it to the next point in the
Yeah.
conversation. So it's more of being reliability engineer, to be honest, than being an AI engineer.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Building agents is tricky because of exactly this. When you let them to run on their own for too long, it's very easy for them to start doing something completely different. It
Yeah,
was
yeah.
uh, there is a beautiful visual representation of that actually. It was quite a lot now on internet that people just took a photo and asked GPT-4o to reproduce the photo without any changes, and they did
Right.
100 iterations, and very quickly you end up with something completely different, which
Mm.
Like, yes, you still keep the original prompt in with text-based agents, but it shows that the drift is there. Even when you use like very modern model, it's still happening, and it's the danger there. Um, would you mind to share more about what's your dev stack you use for those AI agents?
Do you mean in terms of the providers that I use for that? Sure,
Providers, libraries, and so on.
yeah, sure. So let's say in terms of, because it's basically just wiring up multiple async processes. And initially I developed my own sort of pub sub system where each part of the stack would subscribe. I only subscribe to this type of frames, which were like, for example, the audio in would produce audio in frames, which will contain data as base64, and then those would be accepted by the transcriptor. The transcriptor would produce transcription frames, which would be accepted by another. So it would be like a graph, you could say. But then, while I was doing that, Rich Hickey just released Core Async Flow, and I was like, oh yeah, this is exactly what I needed, but my design was worse. And why that design was so good is the fact that it allows you to describe these async interactions between processes as pure functions, and the results are pure functions. Because after I switched to that one, testing became a breeze. Now, sure, you still have impurity, or like imperative code and asynchronous code, which is dependent on specific vendors at the edges,
Yes.
and there's no avoiding that. But at least the core logic of what your process receives and what it sends is very easily testable. I definitely recommend people go check it out if they haven't already. And in terms of let's say vendors for the specific LLMs, text to speech, speech to text. So for telephony, there are multiple providers. There is Twilio, which provide you a WebSocket connection to a live call. Although ideally, for telephony, you should use, it's very good for testing purposes, but then you should go to something like RTP or SIP, so that you don't use TCP, the underlying thing with WebSocket, because you'll always have to, it does like a round trip acceptance, like, hey, did you receive that packet? Yes, which provides some latency. The most important thing in voice calls with AI agents is latency. So the most you can afford is like 600 millisecond, like how it is between me and you right now. Once I finish speaking, or I expect you, like the brain subconsciously expects you to respond within like 500 milliseconds. So if an AI agent takes more than that, takes 1 second, 2 seconds, the conversation feels unnatural, and user frustration feels. So you really need to be on top with that. So how you do that? You do your own on-term deploys of specific providers so that you have all of the infrastructure very close together.
Yes.
And even like your telephony provider should be like very close to your users. For example, in my use case, most of the users and the clients are in Bucharest, in Romania, so I try to have a deployment here to do that. But many times that's not possible with a particular provider that doesn't do on-prem
Yeah.
deployments. For example, 11 Labs, they don't do on-prem because essentially they don't want their technology to be vulnerable to, I would say, like hacking, right? You could basically go and reverse engineer their
Exactly.
execute. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
So you don't have something like that. In
Yeah.
terms of transcription, I would say currently the best I found on the market is DeepGram, and especially oriented to real-time transcription, because it's a completely different thing to do. I have this audio file and please transcribe it for me and send it back whenever you have the result, versus I have this very small chunk of audio. Please give me when the user started speaking, when he or she ended speaking, and like your best confidence result from that, so that I can send that further to an LLM to do inference to create a response.
Yes.
So that's one. For LLMs, I currently the fastest from my experiments, but people might have different results, is Grok Q, because they have that fast inference infrastructure. And of course, there are also now the multimedia models like Gemini Multimodal Live and OpenAI Real-Time API, and those can also be used. However, at least OpenAI Real-Time API is still a bit expensive, so it doesn't necessarily make sense from a business standpoint in various cases. It might work in when it's, I would say, heavily controlled, but
Yeah.
to use at scale, it still doesn't make sense from a monetary perspective. It's still cheaper to employ people.
So when you rely on multiple services like this, in total, do they have high reliability, API always available, or do sometimes run into problems that APIs are not available?
Yeah. When I started doing this 1.5 years ago, that it's a funny story that because back then we only had OpenAI and DeepGram, but back so here in Europe, whenever like the US started coming online, you would see a noticeable lag in OpenAI's LLM responses, and it was always like, okay, it started to be like afternoon in Europe. Okay, the US started being online, and there were requests on OpenAI from that point. So it was consistent. Like in the weekends, early mornings in Europe, it was the best latency to do
Yes.
demos, for example, for clients. But yeah, so that was one. I have to admit, I don't really have this issue nowadays with the providers that I'm using.
Yeah.
I think that's a good thing. Um, I am also investigating now doing the using, especially for text to speech, because using open source models and deploying those on a cloud like Azure, so to have my own
Yeah.
deployment so that you have full control. But of course, for this to work, you also need a particular scale in order for it to be to make sense, because otherwise you would pay a lot for that GPU
Yes. Yeah.
rent.
Also, my experience is that time to first token might take a while. In
Yes.
comparison with hosted clouds. So so you spend maybe $5,000-6,000. You buy a couple of 390 GPUs or whatever is available at the moment, and once it starts generating tokens, it's decent. It's like it generates as fast as you can read, but the problem is
Yeah.
the waiting until it will start generating, especially if you have hard constraint on how long it takes for people to like have the natural flow of the conversation. When we speak face to face, I don't have to answer because I can, show with my head. I
Yeah.
understand. I'm thinking about the answer. When you are on the phone, it's not possible. You don't have those signals.
Yeah, yeah, and it's funny that you mentioned time to first token is actually the most important metric you need to measure in these to measure the performance of your stack, let's say. Um, and yeah, and funny thing is, after I open sourced the voice FN, I did a presentation of it in the new Clojure meetup, and it got a bit of popularity. And I think I had 10 people ask me, hey, what models should we use, or how can we make this run just locally? I want to just converse with an AI agent locally using just my laptop. And my current answer is you can't, because you need very fast inference on your laptop, basically to run 3 models to do transcription, LLM, text-based response, and text-to-speech. It would take maybe a minute for it to say hello
Yes,
on your local GPU.
yes, exactly. That's true. And at the same time, when you use hosted clouds and 11 Labs, so 11 Labs has that. I'm not sure if it was them or somebody used their API, that you are staring into camera, do things, and David Attenborough is narrating what you are doing.
Okay.
Have you seen?
Interesting. I don't think I've seen this now.
Okay, 1 second. I will find it and I will add it to yes, celebrity voice cloning. And so somebody created, it's open source, it's on GitHub, and you look into the camera, you can do anything, you can play with the pen, and it's using his voice and speaks like, and here we can see an animal, their habitat, which looks like a home office. And and he's playing with the pencil. Oh, such an ultimate piece of wonder. It's great. It's a lot of fun. And the only thing you need to run it is you need API key, and you can run it. Yes, here I found it. I will
Yeah,
share it, and I will share it in under this video as well.
yeah.
Okay.
Interestingly enough, I think there, like in the last maybe 2 years, there's been an explosion of options for text to speech. So text to speech, there are now maybe 30, 40 providers. But funny enough, so transcription, especially for some underserved languages with decent latency, please maybe somebody correct me, but I don't think I found like more than 3 or 4 or 5 which are like commercial grade enterprise level, which are very reliable. Because I think it's a harder problem to solve, especially endpointing. And the worst thing is when you go into professional language for a specific domain like medical or I don't know, construction or things
Yes,
like that, like a highly technical domain.
you're absolutely right. And it's not just transcriptions. Even LLMs seem to me that they are significantly weaker when you are not communicating in the mainstream language, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
It's very easy to build on English, but
yeah.
yeah, it's
I don't know what's the situation with Romanian. I don't speak Czech, or I don't use Czech when I speak with LLMs. But when I tried, they didn't know things they know in English. Surprisingly, even facts about the Czech Republic, where I'm from. Um,
hmm.
it's it's funny, but over time, I think they will get better, and it's a huge opportunity for European startups or like startups in other places in the world to catch up and get better. And it
Yeah,
might
definitely.
for other companies how to compete. But let's get back to Clojure. So how did you get to Clojure?
So it's a funny story. I don't know if people know this, but you were mainly the reason I got into Clojure because so at the time I was doing React and React Native, and Flexiana approached me to do for a React Native position, and I went on your website to see, okay, who are these guys? And you had a page which was, we are committed to Clojure. And I think below it was like, why Clojure is awesome, why
Yes.
this, why
Yeah.
that. And that really got me curious, but also surprised because I was like, what's this Clojure language? Because you never see people going like, we are committed to Java or we are committed to TypeScript. It's a tool. It's like, yeah, okay, so nobody says things like that. So that intrigued me, and I was okay. Let me go and search. So I got into the Rich Hickey talks, and after that, we actually got had the. I don't know if you remember this. We had the interview, and I said, yeah, I saw this Clojure language that you use. It's interesting, and you were like, yeah, it's a pretty good language, and I said to you, yeah, maybe I think if we start working together, maybe in like 2, 3 months, I can also learn that and be productive in that. And I remember you saying like, I highly doubt you'll be productive in 3 months, but okay, you can start learning it.
Yeah.
And
So
you were right. I
so
was not productive in 3 months. I was
yes,
maybe in 6. I was
yes,
decent.
yes. So we were speaking. I found it January 12th, 2021.
2021. Okay.
2021, January 12th, 9 in the morning. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yes, we got on the call, and I remember that I said that it's changing. Like our culture is very different because of Clojure. Because in other companies, people speak about design patterns, and we
Yeah.
more about high order functions and
Mm.
software transactional memory and things like that. And so the time to do something is not that long, but to completely switch from object-oriented thinking to functional thinking takes a while. And even functional thinking, it's not the best analogy, because when you do Haskell and when you do Clojure, you are thinking completely differently. Or I came to Clojure from Erlang, where
Mm-hmm.
you have actors and you do recursion all the time. So basically, you always do a small piece of work, and
Yeah.
you do recursion. So you always like iterate in small pieces. While in Clojure, you are more likely to combine or create your own high order functions that will do
Indeed.
what you want to achieve. Instead of having actors that do one piece at a time, it's more idiomatic in Clojure to like build a high order function that will process the whole collection or the whole data structure. And you might do some things in parallel or one piece at a time or
Yeah.
this, but it's a different approach to Erlang. And
It's definitely like for me when because the first thing after I saw, okay, Clojure school, I was always having in the back of my head a project I wanted to start. It was a platform for designers. So I said, okay, let me use Clojure to build the backend for this and the front end in React. Bad move, by the way. If you ever want to start a startup to make money, use technology that you're comfortable with, because it will take you a very long time if you also do use a technology that you don't know about. But what I wanted to say is that I think it took me like 3 months, 4 months just to get into the REPL workflow. So when I was debugging or doing something, I would still do print line inside the function, which I still do, but it was more like executing the main of the I remember this, that it really clicked for me, like, oh, I need to evaluate everything in REPL and execute there with these variables. Oh, okay, it makes sense like that. And it was Sean Corfield that actually helped me with this, and he was super helpful back in the day. I think even now he got on a call with me. He was like, "Oh yeah, you shouldn't do it like that. Just evaluate like this." And now you debug. Oh, okay. And I think after 5 months, I got into a groove. But until 5 months working on my own with Clojure, I admit I low key regretted starting with it, because I knew I would have moved way faster with something like Node.js at that time, because I was more comfortable with it.
yeah,
So yeah.
but at the same time, the problem is that once you uh, see language that's higher level, going back to language that's less expressive is painful in different ways. Like I always say that Clojure developers and Golang developers are very productive, but each of them for
Mm-hmm.
different reason. In Golang, it's not very elegant language, but there is
Yeah.
one way how to achieve things. So you don't have to think twice to like pick what is the correct implementation. You go, you write it down, and in other languages, you might have ways how to express the same idea in not 100 lines, but in 20 lines of code. But you have one way,
Mm-hmm.
you write it down, and it's there, and it works, and it's fast. With Clojure, you have like infinite composability. You can create your own syntax, and all Lisp developers do create their own syntax. In Lisp, they do it more often with macros. I think in
Yeah.
Clojure, we don't use macros. Actually, what we do is we use other people's macros.
Yeah. Yeah.
What is very common are those higher order functions, right? And we combine them together so we can use threading macros, so it looks like a beautiful sequence of transformations. And so this is a different approach how to be productive, where you end up with fewer lines of code, but you have to think and learn first to get there, and it's not easy.
Indeed, it takes a while for you to become comfortable with it, but once you have that, you you have a surge of productivity for sure, and especially being a solo developer or having a very very small team like one or two developers, maybe three developers, you will still be very very productive and compete with
Yes.
maybe teams of five, six, or even more.
Yeah.
And I think that this is what kept me going, because I've had like in front of me the promise. I don't know, because I think watching the interviews and watching the people that did talks on the language, it seems that everybody was having like something like 20 years of experience or more. So you kind of have this promise of, hey, stick through the hard parts and it's definitely going to be rewarding.
Yes. Yes. And I believe it's true. Um,
Yeah.
it it is definitely rewarding. I wonder how would everything would look like if we did not start with languages like Turbo Pascal or Quick Basic when we were small. If we were starting with Scheme and Lisp, if we would be now saying, oh, Clojure, it's natural, it's easy to learn, but learning C# or TypeScript, it's so difficult, but over time it becomes more rewarding. Uh, but, even those,
Interesting. Yeah.
yeah,
It's because, so you say because the mental model we presented first is the let's say imperative one. Uh, so indeed, I remember in college I had a semester where I did, it was called Programming Paradigms, and we did three functional languages in one semester. Looking back now, I think that's way too little time. So we did Scheme for maybe 1.5 months, Haskell for 1.5 months, and then Prolog for the
well,
rest of the time. So you had one project in each. And I remember, maybe I wasn't also the best student at the time. I wasn't, my head wasn't really into it, but I remember it was so confusing. I was like, what's this, man? We like in Java, and at the same time we were doing Java in another course, and I was like, this makes way more sense. At the time, that was like the my mentality. I remember this. It's interesting. Maybe if in high school or when you do your first programming concepts, they introduce you with a functional language, maybe that would be closer to you. But I think it's hard to go from first principles and explain to somebody like the first principle. I think it's possible to do, but it like the imperative ones map better to our, let's say, how you do mathematics. You'd say like a plus b. Okay, that makes sense for
yeah.
me, instead of like, yeah,
But also familiarity helps. Like if we as
yeah,
are starting with functional languages, this would help. Like so, when I learned Italian, it took me a while to get there. But now when I'm learning Spanish, it's actually much faster and much easier because so many things are so similar and you see parallels. So enough is abbastanza in Italian, bastante in Spanish. Okay, it's so close. So now I understand the relationship and from common list to Clojure, you could see parallels as well. And
yeah,
we all were learning languages based on algo. And yeah, also one thing that might be seen as advantage of Clojure and those languages is lower cognitive load, right? You don't need to keep so many things in your head because the whole space are just parameters of the function.
mm,
You don't have like a huge, let's say, global state or multiple objects that are changing under your hands. And it's something people don't speak about enough. Uh,
yeah. I think one thing which I've heard people that got into Clojure had was when they were in college, it was basically like, not you have to choose between this editor or that editor. It was like, yeah, install Emacs. And that would give you a bit of an introduction to Emacs Lisp. So
mhm.
you would have a bit of familiarity to a functional language. So then when you see something like Clojure or Common Lisp, it's way more at hand.
Yeah,
And it doesn't do, because many people have that initial repulsion of parentheses, like, oh, what's that? No, no, not for me, you know? But I think once you have like, I remember this. Okay, let me look into it.
There is about the same amount of parentheses when you look
Yes.
in C and in Lisp. It's just where we put them, and it's all the round parentheses and not multiple types of parentheses. But like people, when you switch to Lisp, many people just see parentheses because they are in the wrong place. But there is more or less the same amount of them.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. And I think it's a bit more
Yes.
elegant in a way, especially for editing and navigation, because you have the the scope delimited. So okay, it's just this thing. Let me move up of it and that way.
Yes.
Yeah, I think this is maybe one of the reasons I don't like Python that much.
Uh,
It's yeah.
I wonder why there is no big MVC framework in Clojure, like anything like Rails or Django.
Yeah, that's interesting. So maybe one thing is that from what I see, most people that come to Clojure are a bit burnt with other languages like Java. I'm not sure with PHP or Ruby, because I know Clojure devs who did Ruby who still have nice things to say about Ruby. So but I haven't used it. So, but this is what I hear. So it might be that Clojure doesn't have an MVC framework because people still have that hesitation based on how bad it felt in a language with a popular MVC framework. So that's why maybe it's an association like, don't do that. It might make it bad. So that might be one thing. But I think in the Clojure community, I wouldn't call them full MVC frameworks. I would call them like it's almost a framework like Beef, Luminous, Kit, all of these web stacks. Okay, let's call them that, are close to an MVC framework, and they are the first ways people do like a practical. Let's say if you want to do a web server, web project, when you first get into Clojure, you would go and look at those and try those out because they have documentation, they have all these things, and I see that they have adoption. Maybe it's a bit of a culture that kind of looms over your head and says to you, it's bad to use an MVC framework. Sometimes they are very practical, especially if you want to do something very fast, because I mean, if you want to do like a production grade level application, you need a lot of things. You need authentication. Most people nowadays expect that you have login with Google, beautiful UIs to go with that navigation, history, database integration, and things like that. And if you don't know what you're doing, if you're getting first into that, and even if you're a senior, it will take you maybe a week or something like that to have all of that composed, because in the Clojure ecosystem, people like to compose libraries and have their own thing because they can control it. But that cost of flexibility will be time for you to do everything of that nature. So that is one.
Yeah.
I think the second thing is what you said earlier, that in Clojure you can do the same thing in multiple ways. In many of these MVC frameworks, it's quite the same. In Laravel, to do authentication, if I go and look at 5 Laravel projects, I am pretty confident that the authentication would look almost the same in all of those frameworks. But in Clojure, in 5 projects, you wouldn't see one of the same authentication. So it might be also that people have opinions on what something is idiomatic.
Yeah.
Maybe something like that. But I think like projects that show examples of how to wire things together in a good configurable way, Clojure devs are receptive to that, and you can see that from Beef, from Kit, and all of these things, and even from Ship Clojure, because people have been very receptive to that.
I think partially the reason might be fashion. MVC frameworks were topic a long time ago, very long time ago, more than 15 years ago, um, and this is when all of those frameworks started, right? Rails might be 20 years old soon, Django as well. Then
Yeah,
JavaScript started growing in popularity, and JavaScript had a very strong culture of dev stacks. And at the same time, people started moving to Clojure. Clojure growth is the same time as the growth of popularity in JavaScript, except 100
yes,
times smaller than JavaScript, but the shape of the growth of popularity was about the same. And so people were moving away from MVC frameworks, and it was everybody was speaking about dev stacks. Just like short after that, people started speaking about microservices, which is another nail to the coffin of MVC frameworks. And then we started speaking about containers and having small containers. So basically, people were thinking of decomposing applications into much smaller services that are as
yeah,
lightweight as possible. And this is the world where Clojure was growing, and all around that, everybody was building applications as containerized microservices. Nowadays, it seems to me that people are moving a little bit back towards monolith architecture, especially because they realize that they are not Netflix or a company of similar size.
I think
And when
I
you are
lost
just
you
a
there.
small web application, monolith might be good enough. Um,
Yeah,
uh,
I
yeah,
kind of share the preference for a monolith, to be honest. I haven't yet experienced the need for doing something in a microservice approach. Uh, I think the main reason people should go to microservices is release scheduling. If you have a very big team and they need to do separate releases and you cannot synchronize the parts of the monolith that people should release, I think that's maybe one of the reasons you should go to microservices. But yeah, I haven't yet experienced the need like, oh, we need to go, except if there's one really big fan of microservices that
yeah,
wants to push that just because it's something that he or she is either comfortable with or wants to do.
yeah. Also, available libraries might be a good reason. So we were building Bitcoin wallet, and everything that was available for Clojure was terrible. Python had awesome libraries. Even Java had good libraries. They just had to be wrapped. But it was classic OOP. So when we wrapped it, it was still ugly.
Yeah.
Spent multiple months, maybe a year, implementing plenty of cryptographic algorithms from Bitcoin, which is exactly what you should not do, right? Especially if there are existing
Yes.
implementations. Actually, this was a place where we probably did a mistake because we were building monolithic Clojure application. We should have used some other language which has
Mm.
already all the algorithms, and let's say deploy it as two services, and it
Yeah.
would be
Yeah.
much faster. And again, we would not be implementing our own cryptography, which is super tricky anyway, even when we wrote plenty of tests and so on.
Yeah. Yeah. It's still a bit risky to do that. Yeah.
So I follow you on social networks, and you speak about vibe coding from time to time. What
Yeah.
do you think about vibe coding?
So I think the new vibe coding era that began with editors like Cursor and Cloud Code, I think it's a good thing overall for the industry. People had the panic that software development is dead and things like that, and so the first time I knew that it's a very much safe profession, I went to a local hackathon here where you had entrepreneurs building like ideas. It was like, okay, it was 7 people and you can go and build something you want, and you would bounce around ideas. People will help you, get you unstuck. And we were like 2 technical people and 5 non-technical people, but they were using Bolt, New, Lovable, Cursor, and all of these tools, right? And that's when I realized we are still safe because I'll tell you why. So they had some results using those tools. They had like an initial demoable something, but they didn't want to do that. They didn't want to be the new developer. They still want to hire somebody to do that for them. And you still get to a point where I think people call it now the 80, 90% done, and AI can get you there. But then to finish it's going to be very hard, especially if you don't have experience. And there's a new branch of people who are kind of the developers. So not the, let's say, non-technical business people that they really don't start coding unless it's a demo and they want to raise money. But there were people who were not programming before, who are now building products and they like it. And these are the vibe coders, and like developers like to dunk on them. But I think gradually, the more they will do this, the more they will actually learn software development, because you have to. You cannot, at this moment, you cannot fully just rely on AI, because you will have a blocking point. And at that point, you really have to start to understand, okay, what is this? What's this error? What does this mean? And you gradually start doing it. And the other thing for software developers with experience, it's a very good tool to boost your productivity, especially for things that you can do, but you don't really want to. Like, I use it a lot for example, when I use Ship Clojure to do like a small proof of concept for something, I say I use Cloud Code, and I say it has documentation for everything, like components, app structure, where it should put stuff, code guidelines, things like that, so that the code is good, so it's not like slop. And I say, hey, write the UI for this dashboard page. You should do this, it should do that, like how you would write a ticket for a developer. I write that, and while it does that, I go ahead on the back and then I write the endpoints, and I kind of check in from time to time and see where it's at, things like that, and that works out very well. And then I can go on my, because basically it does a boilerplate for me, like a starting point for me, because I don't really want to, or I need some starting ground for the UI or for the backend or for tests. The best thing I love using it for is to write scenes. So I have UI components and I make it to write scenes, like usage scenes for that thing. People might be familiar with Storybook or dev cards. It was dev cards in the past. Then apparently Storybook stole the idea from the Clojure world for dev cards, and then they took Storybook quite far. And then Christian Johansson built Portfolio, which is the same idea brought back to Clojure and in a good maintained way. And I use that, and it's very good. And so I use that, and I say, hey, for this component, write all of the usage for props and stuff, and write scenes for that, and it's great.
But if I can
Go ahead.
interrupt you for a second, so vibe coding, like how does it differ when it's in the hands of very senior developer and when it is used by somebody who is junior developer or non-technical? Like, do you think that people who are junior developers, they can really, like, first 90% take you a little bit of time and you get far, but then you have those like second 90%, which looks like small changes, and finally it's done, but it takes a lot of time.
Yeah.
And you need skills, you need seniority to push through those like last 90%, which originally were just 10%. Like, how what will juniors do? How will developers if senior developers will become super productive? How are junior developers going to get jobs in the future? How are they going to become senior without staring to screens and looking for that stupid typo they were looking for 2 hours, instead of just feeding the error back to AI?
It's a good question. I think it requires discipline. For example, I've had this experience where I used Cursor for a bit of time, and the autocomplete on that, my experience is that it's very good. And at some point, I was like, only just tab, tab, tab is good. And at some point, I had to snap out of it. Because uh, it's what I like to do. I like to code. I don't want that thing to be taken away from me.
Yes.
So I ended up not sticking with it. And even in Emacs, I had Copilot completions and I deactivated those. I don't have like under the cursor AI completions. I don't want them. I want to code myself. I just use the agentic thing like, hey, do this for me, and it's scoped, it's done. But for junior developers, I think you need discipline. I think the first thing you need to do is this thing where it's
Yeah.
disable auto completions in that sense, because I don't think that is conducive to memory or to
Yeah.
understand something. Whenever it's something that you want to learn, some good prompts that I've used and taken from others is help me understand this concept or thing. Don't give me the answer, give me hints and nudge me in the right
Yeah.
direction. So it's like a teacher kind of. And the second thing is an example that happened to me recently. It was when I was trying to understand SIP, because I'm a lot in the telephony development area. So I was trying to understand that at a deeper level, and I was initially using AI, and it was telling me how that works, what are the methods that it uses. And I admit it was still confusing. I was like, man, what's this thing? And until I actually picked up the book, SIP, I forget the name, man. I'll maybe put it in the comments, but the session initiation protocol,
Yes.
the complete definition, fourth edition. And I really didn't go through chapters then, because you need like more complete context and maybe history of why this was needed, how it is used. I think this is how we learn better. So if you truly want a career as a software developer, you need to go in depth with your concepts. But it's true that there are people that are dropping out of computer science college because they are afraid that it doesn't make sense anymore to do this
Yeah.
course because AI will take the job. My little cousin, we had this conversation, and I truly think that's not gonna be the case, because exactly like I was reading in this book, uh, um, all of the complex software that keeps this industry together, or like you have associations like YANA, IETF, all of the people that do RFCs and
Yeah.
proposals for new protocols and things like that. I highly, highly doubt this will be
Yeah.
replaced by AI, because I don't think we could ever trust it with
Yes.
that
There is
amount of
another thing
responsibility.
that LLMs, yes, they can generate source code, but they can do plenty of things for, let's say, white collar jobs. And if we are going to see LLMs taking a lot of jobs, it means that it will take a lot of work from lawyers and consultants. But all of this will end up being a software and somebody has to run, maintain, and so on. So actually, if I was choosing between a lawyer and a software developer in 2025, I would rather be a developer because you will be on that side of the industry that's going to automate some part, not all of their job, but some part of their job away into software. There will be um, less tasks for lawyers that LLMs can do, but there will be more software. Um, Also, one
Yeah,
thing about vibe coding is I think it will be good practice to decide not to use AI for certain things. Like, I believe vibe coding as a word was invented by Andrei Karpathy.
yeah.
And so I was a couple of months ago, I was studying how to implement random forests, which is
Hmm.
a very good machine learning algorithms. For certain cases, it gives perfect results. And I wanted to see how it looks in JavaScript because I wanted to use it on front end. And Forest.js implementation was implemented by him 13 years ago. So actually,
Okay.
yes. So when you are vibe coding, when you 13 years ago you were already building algorithms like this, it's much easier for you to be a vibe coder because you instantly see, okay, even those algorithms within some machine learning algorithm are not correct, and you can say why. So I think the path for junior developers will be actually torturing themselves with not using LLMs, and having experience of like looking for those typos, or badly expressed data structures and algorithms, to understand this, and then they can use LLMs for plenty of other things to be productive. Because like it's hard to be productive
Yeah.
without LLMs, especially on tasks that are not cutting edge. If you do something repetitive, you can very often get very good solutions from LLMs straight away.
Yeah. I think it's also something to do with the ones who truly like programming, they will still make it.
Yeah,
Because if we look back at ourselves, I bet you had to do tasks where you could have just used the library to achieve a certain thing, but you sometimes you have this underlying desire, yeah, but I want to know how it works. Because I'm not comfortable using something that's kind of like a black box. I just call a method and it does the thing. I really want to understand what it does. And just many times you even, I remember getting into conflict, like, just use that thing, doesn't matter. Dude, but I don't know what this does. It might be, you have no idea how this will work in the future. So you have this underlying calling of understanding what happens under the hood. And there's this great, I think this is why, especially the people that come to Clojure are this way, that they are have they that's coming back to the MVC thing. They really don't like black boxes. There's like these generators, and like in the CLI do something like create everything, create a to do model view controller, and you have everything done for you, and you're like, I prefer to know what happens over there.
yeah,
So I think the juniors that really enjoy programming will still become proficient, but and it's totally fine for people that just want to build something because they have a particular problem and they use AI to build a Chrome extension, but they have no idea how that's done. That's perfectly fine. You don't want to be a programmer. That's totally valid. But I am fairly certain that developers that truly want to become developers and would have guidance,
yes,
but this is another thing which is complicated because companies prefer to employ seniors because they would be productive faster. And especially if you employ a junior, he will require a big investment time, and then you are not even certain that he will stay with the company, because once he's productive, he might feel confident to go and do another job. So it's a complicated relationship here, I think. You
yes,
really need to study on your own.
yes. Another thing, sometimes I write on this topic on social networks is like how to get to programming and engineering, and the whole field is huge. So when you want to build a web app, there is so much things on front end. There is so many other things on backend and databases, and but then there are web servers, HTTP protocol, security. Then you have to think about file system, um, and then you have to sometimes think about like how to set up various daemons on Linux, and then deployment, configuration of servers. There is so many things that are not easy to learn.
Yeah.
And it's just like building web applications. It's a huge field. And so I sometimes say that if in order to be a good engineer, you have to start young. And people are allergic to it because it sounds like I want to exclude people. But for example, I will give you an example. So my brother-in-law, my wife's brother, he he started working, like he started programming in Java in his 30s. But he is clever guy. He has PhD from classic music and he plays in symphonic orchestra for 15 years already. But he wants to try programming and maybe turn it into his job. But now he has two kids. So he has a job, he has two daughters, a family, work around the house, and so on. And on top of that, learning to become Java developer is tricky. So I always tell him, sometimes we do pair programming, I do code review for him, but still, like, it's just scratching the surface. And if he will watch it, I don't want to demotivate him. It's worth it. This field is so huge. There is so much to learn.
Yeah.
I think the best thing is when you start as a child or before you have kids, because when you start as a child, your time is zero. Like you can pick any hobby and it's not hurting anyone. And
Yeah.
so it's the best time to start programming or doing any like tough field that has a lot to learn. When you do this as a child, or the worst case as a student, before anybody relies on you and you have like time to just learn, this is the best. So actually, there is still a chance. I think people will start young when their time is really worth zero. They can get through those times where they don't have to be productive. They just play.
Yeah.
When I started programming, I was just like messing around with my neighbors and my cousin because they had computers. I didn't. I was programming on paper, and then I went to my neighbors, to their computer. I tried writing it down and tested if it works. It was the slowest compilation cycle in my town. I needed to walk across the street to compile my code. But but actually, like, yes, my time was worth zero,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
it doesn't matter.
I see what you mean. But okay, even in that scenario, I think it's definitely possible, but you should be realistic about the amount of time it actually takes. Because let's say he can dedicate 2 hours daily, it
Yeah,
would take him 2 3 years
yeah.
to become good, I would say.
Employable, maybe employable junior, but
Yeah.
to become a good developer, it takes a decade.
I also had an experience. So after I finished college, I worked at a startup, and we had another colleague who did a 6 month boot camp, and then had another job for I think a year,
Yeah,
and we were working together. There was no AI in that time, and but indeed I saw the difference that he could code TypeScript and React, but he had no idea what happened under the hood. For
underneath.
him, that was, yeah, for him, that was it. Like JS6, for example, the markup
Yes,
language for JavaScript, you could say. For him, that was part of the language. That's not like a on top thing that gets transpiled to final JavaScript.
yeah,
That's like React.render element. For him, that was language.
yes,
And like doing terminal stuff, it was like, so you could see the very scoped knowledge that he had. Now, granted, he because he landed the job and he continued to expand, he gradually expanded that knowledge
yeah,
and understood how things were. But it really takes a while, and you can see in people if you talk
yeah.
to somebody like that, you can see it. But I think you being eager to learn and like passionate about this will take you far. If people see that in you, the passion, they are willing to give you a chance just because you're passionate.
Yes, yes. Also, there are nowadays frameworks that allow you to achieve plenty of great things. It might be motivating. With my kids, they do Scratch, so
Mm.
they make games in Scratch, and soon we will be looking into Unity, so they will be able to create their own games in Unity. They already started doing some 3D modeling in Blender. So like you can do a lot with little.
My little cousin, when he was 12, he was very annoyed by his big sister, so I got him an Arduino and we started to go around and then program it. And we did like a small thing that when his sister was coming nearby his room, he had a proximity sensor to like sound the speaker when she was getting near, so that, and that was like very cool at the time. So there are a lot of cool things to do to get people attracted while they are young.
This is waiting for
Ah,
them
yeah,
once they will be old enough.
yeah.
So yeah, plenty of sensors and motors and everything. So yeah,
Yeah.
Monday
I
they
think I was more passionate about that than him, to be honest. But it's really fun doing that.
yeah, yeah. So honestly, I think it might be the same like fathers who love football, their kids, their sons end up playing football. Fathers
Yeah,
love, I don't know, shooting, their kids end up shooting. So I have my wife best friend, so her father used to lead a shooting range. So now
yeah, okay.
he has daughters, so both daughters are shooters. So yes, but it's a good work being an engineer. You work
Yeah,
stable time. Nobody's shouting at you. The money are good. You work with clever people. It's good for girls. Actually, it's surprising there is not more girls in this field. Um, so yeah, why not? By the way, let's speak about Ship Clojure. Your, let's say, second job in a way or a product. What is it?
yeah. So Ship Clojure is it's a starter kit, a premium boilerplate for you to ship a Clojure production ready product fast, like
Yeah,
or do like a startup. So basically, it came from my frustration that I like to build products on my own. I like to, and I did a lot. I did a platform for designers. I did a chatbot that was logging calories for you, the voice AI agents, and then a platform for you to build your own voice AI agents. And it was always, when I had to do, especially UI or even backend with Clojure,
yeah,
once you get to a point where you have everything set up and you know your way around, then you're very productive and it's awesome. But until you get to that point, it is painful. And especially with startups that you have an idea, like let's say person one and person two have the same idea,
yeah,
and person one starts with Clojure and person two starts with Python and React. In 1 week, and especially this guy vibe coding, he will be miles ahead than this guy, because in the first week, this guy will do database, do routing. Wait, how do you do login with Google? I need to go and understand OAuth. I need to go, wait, UI. I need to do how do we set up Clojure script? I need to do interop with React. It's a lot of things to do. Even if you're a senior, it's a lot of things to do. So Ship Clojure, it's a boilerplate that has multiple libraries. It respects the Clojure philosophy of not being a framework, but being a composition of multiple libraries. And you have heavy documentation to understand how all of that fits together, and how everything is set up, and then links if you want to go deeper into the subject matter. It helps you with AI integrations, for example. It has a lot of documentation. This was basically a byproduct of me building Ship Clojure, because when you use AI, I was like, I am very happy with the output that AI gives now. So
yeah,
let me include the prompts and the documentation. And you see this trend now with libraries, that they include either their entire repository or just the documentation as a prompt, so that you can use that for LLMs. For example, UIX has now a repo mix, which is basically the whole documentation of UIX just in one file, so that you can feed that to LLMs for them to generate better UIX code. The stack for the application is is UIX, it's Reframe. It uses Daisy UI, so it's pure CSS. I did not want to do a lot of JavaScript interop like with ShadCN, which is now the very popular option, simply because I want to do server-side rendering, and it supports server-side rendering on the JVM with UIX, and then you hydrate that on the front end with React so that you have interactivity, but you also have rich SEO pages or landing pages. You have blog pages, and you can put blogs fast so that you can go fast in SEO in your page. It has Stripe integration with payments and support and documentation to do subscriptions and one-time payments. Let me think. Yeah, support to do OAuth for Google, Facebook, and whatever else provider you can think of. A lot of example pages like settings, billing support, and everything like the edges around your core business that you don't really want to do, but you have to do.
Yeah.
And so it has that taken care for you so that you can focus on your core business logic. We launched last week the full launch. Until now it was just a pre-order, and yeah, it was quite a good reception. It had the people that bought it were very happy with it. I'm quite happy with the result. To be honest with you, when I started, I really didn't think people would care for it. It was just I've had this issue, and I just ranted on social media that, hey, I wish somebody built this, and it got super retweeted, and I was like, okay, apparently there people resonate with this annoyance of mine that it takes almost a month to get even started with a serious product.
Another thing is, it's not the classic SaaS boilerplate, right? Like in normal classic SaaS boilerplate, what you are trying to address are payments, accounts, maybe some automatic admin interface, but you have also created like 100 UI components, plenty of screens, which is not often included in those SaaS boilerplates.
It was more because I had to, because in Clojure there isn't so boilerplates for like more popular languages like JavaScript or Python or things like that already have a UI component system done for them. I mean, there were some like Recom, the components for Reframe, but to be honest, I don't think those were up to par. In modern SaaS products, customers are really accustomed to high level of design. So you really wouldn't cut it with like your black and white buttons and inputs and things like that. You want nice animations and beautiful UI. And it does use Tailwind and Daisy UI, but all of that is hidden under UI components that you just give props to, and there are dev scenes like portfolio scenes for all of them for usage. I'm quite proud of the UI library for that. So yeah, indeed, it has a lot more insight than your normal boilerplate, because most boilerplates just use libraries for those kind of things, but I just didn't have them. I didn't have those libraries.
Yeah, but I bet you used Claude Code heavily to get those, right?
I used Claude more to do the scenes. So like, hey, I have this button, write scenes like stories. For all of the states, this button can be, okay, for all of the colors, primary, secondary, error, warning, success.
Mm-hmm.
For if it has a loading state, if it's a button with an icon, if it's three buttons joined together into like sort of tabs, if it's a button in the soft state, if it's a link button, if it's an outline button, and all of the colors and things like that, it has. So it's basically for all of those things. It's a good UI, and it also supports like 30 themes. If you visit shipclojure.com, you can see that in the landing page you can click on multiple themes, and you can see the whole page and the dashboard demo transformed to that specific theme. So that, I think, it's quite a nice touch there. So yeah, luckily there were also support for things. So I was very happy to see this. The recently released Stripe library from I don't want to botch his name. I think it's Sonar Ono or something like this. And he got actually the library listed on Stripe's community maintained libraries, like the official list of libraries you should use. The Clojure one, it's listed there.
Yeah. Let me tell you a story actually. So we have a
Okay.
framework called Flexiana, which is also like a bunch of Clojure libraries, and I was evaluating an option that we would potentially try to find people who might want have a SaaS product built, and I wanted to see what exists. And also, and the outcome would be analysis for us, but also an article for our website. It ended up being the most expensive article in the history of Flexiana. And this article cost us $10,000. So basically what we did, we bought licenses for Use Gravity for Node.js, SAS Pegasus for Python, Laravel, Spark. I don't know. Yeah, I think it was quite cheap. And then there's Bullet Train for Rails, which is free. We hire developers with at least 5 years of professional experience. Then we asked one of our colleagues to work with Flexiana in Clojure, and they were building the same thing. I'm not sure if they had a limit for 40 or 80 hours. And we end up with, let's say, we were building the same SaaS application, and we were like mapping how far we got and how was the code and so on. The conclusions, like it ended up being an article, which is, I think, not published at the moment because those examples of source code would basically include source code of those frameworks or dev stacks, and we can't because of the license. But anyway, so Use Gravity, very future complete. It was doing a lot of things, but the code was, I would say, outdated. Modern JavaScript is now, let's say, it's not that modern JavaScript. Pegasus was really good, featureful. If I was picking one solution, I would likely pick this one. It was long before Ship Clojure. Now I would definitely look into it. Laravel Spark was good. Quite productive. Bullet Train was not idiomatic Rails. So the developer we hired said that even when on paper there are plenty of features, but he didn't like the result because this is not how Rails should look like. And then one of our colleagues who was working with Clojure and Flexiana framework, he actually got quite far. So he did not implement any payments. Like having payments is one of the biggest advantages of those like scaffoldings for products. But besides that, he got quite far in the building of the application. And I am now, it's hard to say. Is it because the biggest advantages are, let's say, accounts and payments, or is it because Clojure is more productive? Like, it's hard to say. I want to be as unbiased as possible, but I must say that actually, like in those dev stacks, first couple of days, you are just killing it. It looks like it's almost finished. And later, your productivity is about the same as productivity of somebody who is using the framework. So when you use, I don't know, SAS Pegasus, save maybe 2 weeks in the beginning, and then you are more or less the same productive as somebody using Django. And of course, when you look at those frameworks, or however you want to call it, they cost a few $100s. So if you value your time more, let's say if you value your time more than, I don't know, $15 per hour, it might be easily a good deal to buy such a thing and start building on top of that. And actually adding documentation for AI is a good idea. I didn't think about this because it might be an obstacle when you come up with something that's partially closed source. how you will teach the AI. So if you will provide, let's say, markdown files for all namespaces, so the AI can scan it, read it, and use it, you might actually get pretty far with such an approach.
Yeah, it came from just the feedback loop with
Yeah,
AI doing. So okay, you're using reframe wrong. Let me write some documentation about how to do good reframe development. Uh, Here's how you do UIX in a good way. Here's all the documentation when you need it, and things like that. I'm curious about your Clojure developer. Um, how how good was the UI for the project, or what were you using?
so I think he just so he was using Reframe, Reagent, and Tailwind. And he was one of the developers of Frankie, which is our HR platform. So
Ah, okay.
at that moment, he was already working daily with Reframe, Reagent, and Tailwind for a couple of years. And it's also one of the few people in my life who never worked in another language. He's a native Clojure developer all his life. So um, so it was maybe advantage, hard to say really, but really when we were picking people, all people we hired for this experiment had 5+ years of professional
Mm.
experience with those frameworks, and they got a chance. They knew in advance what boilerplate, or let's say what they will be using
Hmm.
to do this experiment, so they could study the documentation and so on in advance. So
That's
we
interesting.
make it as fair as possible. So like my conclusion in this is really it saves time a lot in the beginning. And if the
Yeah.
cost is, let's say, in hundreds of dollars, and if you value your time, let's say at least $15 plus per hour, it's easily worth it.
I think so too. Especially if like if you want to just experiment or prove an idea, because most of the time the things you build, you have no idea if they will work or not. So you might be better off. Okay, let me just do a fast MVP in a week, just like the core feature of it.
Yeah,
But I have all of these things around me, like database logging, deployment, like in a command and things like this. So I can do it very fast, and then I can spend my time promoting it or doing it. Now, sure, there are people who genuinely enjoy building creative products or projects or things like that, and
yeah,
this is surely not for that kind of people. And I saw even many people that bought it not to use it fully, but just to like copy some parts of the code. Like even for me, when
yeah,
I developed the OAuth flow, like to do login with Google, it's hard to do because you really need to understand actually what happens under the hood. When you go into the JavaScript ecosystem, there are now companies that give you like authentication for free, like Auth0, Clerk, and the other one. You have no idea what happens. They just say, yeah, go into Google, get this secret ID and client ID, just put them here, you're done. Okay.
yeah,
But in Clojure, if you want to do that, you need to understand how that actually works.
yeah. In Ship Clojure, you are focusing on or let's say a backend where you are able to render pages on backend and do quite a part of the code on the backend side. And I have
Yeah.
kind of related question, and it is um, back in the day, everything was rendered on backend. Then people switched to something which we call single page apps, where you have like the
Yeah.
complete environment on front end. You have to remember, you have to basically implement back button. You have to implement scroll positions and things like that. And I think there is a third option, multi-page apps, where you might have a few pages that are highly responsive or highly interactive, and these might be full of JavaScript implemented fully on front end, and then you might have, let's say, 60-70% of pages rendered on back end, maybe having some progresses and enhancements for example, validation in forms. Why didn't this approach succeed?
Uh, so one thing, I think it's also a bit related to fashion. When I think React exploded, it brought together this infusion of single page apps. And then people realized, oh, but now we don't have SEO, and I still want to use React, but I want SEO. So initially they did this thing where people were using a Chromium headless agent to run the React rendering and have the HTML generated and serve that for their static pages. So that was the first thing, and then some server rendering frameworks came to be like Next.js. There was another one, I still forget the name of it. It was used for blogs. It was the
Astro? No,
no,
Astro.
not Astro is quite recent one. I think it came out 2 years ago, maybe, or something like that.
Yeah.
Anyway, but like the server rendering frameworks came in, and people gravitated to them. And after that, I think people also found that they have a lot of advantages, but also some limitations. So then some of them were not pleased. Okay, it's very cool that I can do these things with Next.js or this thing, but first of all, you are a bit dependent on their platforms and their hosting services, and they get
Yeah.
quite costly. If you use Next.js and your site gets viral, you will be hit with like I've heard stories of like $100,000 bill for your monthly service, and it's all mainly because you use their image components, which kind of you just put your images there, and their particular image React component will do like resizing and stuff for you, which it will hit an API, and that's basically a Lambda function. So you pay for that thing. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is there's also a technical challenge when you do a mixed multi-page and single page app. So historically, and I think even now, single page apps tend to use JWT tokens to do their authentication, and multi-page apps that are server rendered, tend to use cookies. And it's challenging to do a mixed authentication way. Of course, you could just use cookies with your single page application, and that works. But the trend I see is that single page applications tend to use tokens. And also, most of the time when you have a single page app, you also tend to do, okay, we need a mobile app, and there you most likely will use a JWT since you use the same backend API. So there's that thing. In Ship Clojure, we have a mixed approach where the authenticated side, it's a single page app, so it's fully on the client. And when we do server rendering for landing pages, for the blog, for things which don't require authentication, but you still want to use the UI and you still want interactivity.
Mm-hmm.
But aside from that, if you don't need SEO juice, let's say, I don't think you should use server-side rendering with, let's say, Ship Clojure. But I think in the Clojure ecosystem, people generally start with server-side rendering because it's easier, it's more at hand, and people don't like to go for JavaScript right from the start. And that shows, I think, in the growing popularity of HTMX and
Yeah.
I think not Astro. What's it called?
The
There's
second
a new
is
stack.
but it's similar name. Yeah, and
Yeah,
Alpine.
Alpine. Thank you, Alpine
Alpine.
JS.
Yes, yes. I have
Uh,
actually tried using it with Flexiana, combination of
mhm.
HTMX and Alpine. It's good. You can get pretty far as long as it's more like enhancement of the application. Um, The problem is when you need to switch to a complete like highly interactive interface and you start fighting with the framework. But for what it's useful for or what it's intended for, it's perfect and it saves a lot of time.
Yeah, I like the idea. I admit I haven't used HTMX and these server rendering frameworks. Mainly because I'm comfortable with the JavaScript ecosystem coming from it. And yeah, I don't know. I think you like the downside is that once you scale, you really need to scale your backend a lot to handle all of those requests to do interactivity.
Uh,
Maybe if you do Alpine JS, that kind of does JavaScript for you, so the interactivity is still baked into the client. But I'm not sure how that works.
yeah, so we used it. For example,
Hmm.
flexdoc.flexiana.com, which is a documentation for Clojure, and all libraries we use in Xiana, we have implemented it with HTMX, and
Yeah.
uh, and it works great. It's very fast, so loading every page is very fast. You have all the logic on backend, but
Hmm.
it's actually really the best for situations where when you click on something, you want to replace quite a big block of the page. So more or less,
Yeah.
you just don't want to click around, and you want this like faster interaction. But once you have drag and drops, animations, and so on, those things, or overall, like you want to have complex UI logic. So when you click on some button, some other components will like enlarge. Situations
Yeah.
like HTMX is not intended for that. It's much
Yeah.
closer to, so in Rails they now got it natively, but it was Turbo, right? Or for example in Elixir in Phoenix framework they have a similar technology. How it's called, Live View or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Like Livewire in Laravel.
Livewire, yes, and in Laravel there is Inertia.js.
Yeah. Yeah.
So exactly for those use cases, HTMX is great. But so I don't want to sound negative. I like it. I recommend HTMX. It's just that you have to use it only for things it's intended for. You basically take server-side rendered app and you want to make it a bit faster and more interactive, but more or less the application could be potentially a good old MVC, Rails, or whatever application. In these
Yeah.
cases, it's great.
I
Um,
think, let's say for server-side rendering React on the Clojure ecosystem, I think Roman did a great job with basically implementing himself the JVM rendering of UIX,
yeah.
which actually works surprisingly well. You need to do some knobs because sometimes in your UIX code you will import a JavaScript dependency and you would need to do I have a macro which is like this is a JavaScript dependency or with placeholder. So on the JVM you wouldn't render this, you would render this placeholder, and when you get to the client, that's when you actually render that. And it works similar to how as you said, Inertia.js, where you basically have some data from the backend and then you render the markup with that data, and on the front end you just hydrate.
Yes.
And yeah, it's a similar technique.
Yes. Ah, that's good. Yeah. By the way, how do you like? I haven't tried UIX yet, but I have heard people speaking about it. So I guess it's now a next big thing for Clojure script. It seems to me. How does it compare with reframe reagent workflow?
So you can use reframe from UIX, although it has the added cost that you add the reagent dependency because it still uses ratons. It's great. I think UIX is great because it's macro based, so it's way faster than reagent. I think it's twice as fast in rendering speeds. It's still, I think it's something like one point I might be 1.3, 1.4 times slower than normal React, but
Yeah.
Reagent is two, maybe more than twice as slow. So it's quite an improvement in rendering speed and performance. It's way closer to React semantics. Some people might consider that a disadvantage, but I think it's good if you want to employ people who aren't directly comfortable with Clojure and maybe they are React developers. It's way easier to understand when you come from a React background, UIX as opposed to Reagent. The markup is not a hiccup. It's similar. It actually, I think it's the same as the other framework. You basically have a dollar macro, and you have the dollar macro, and then you put your markup like div, p, let, and then you have functions, or like components. So it works in that way. There are functions and utils for you to basically render with UIX reagent markup or React components. I like it a lot, and Roman adds a lot of functionality to that macro. For example, you just put some meta information on the component declaration so that it is memoizable. It has a lot of linting. For example, in use effects or in all of the React hooks, if you don't include one of the dependencies used inside that hook, he created a baked-in linter in development that will actually tell you on the screen, hey, you actually need to put this dependency or this hook won't work well, which is one of the gripes or one of the foot guns that React developers always end up failing for. So the developer experience is quite nice. I like it. I think currently it's the best React wrapper inside the Clojure ecosystem. But many times it doesn't, let's say, it's not quite a pure mentality, or it's not like how should I say? You don't use pure functions, right? You could say even in reframe, you don't have the concept of pure functions because you kind of inject state into your components that subscribe to state. So it's not like you can do, and you can do the same in reframe where you would have just dumb components that are basically stateless. We just receive all of their state as props, and you would have maybe higher order components that those subscribe to state and just pass the props from the state to the pure components, to the pure functions. So you can definitely do that. Testing, since it doesn't return hiccup, it's not like you cannot just expect the markup. So you would have to use something like a React testing library to actually test your UI with the outputted DOM, let's say. But I find I don't really use it that much, like testing the DOM. I much rather prefer to just test my logic and how the state changes based on an event, and that usually suffices, given that you use reframe for it. And as I said, you can dispatch reframe events and you can subscribe to reframe state, and that works quite well, and that's what I ended up sticking with.
I think there was overall, like, long before people started building single page apps, the MVC pattern originally, I think in the 70s, views used to call models and read data directly. Then they found that it's actually not a good idea. So there was a model view presenter pattern that basically the views was taking data only from presenters, so they had smaller interface, so you didn't have to write so many tests. Then there was another approach, passive view. So view only receives, and all events are handled by controllers. If you have worked with PHP, Zen framework was actually doing this. It's completely passive view. So and basically proponents of passive view said it's now view is so dumb that you don't have to test it because all the logic is elsewhere. A question is nowadays when we have UI state every time, like even even if you try to move to backend as many things as possible. So basically the app state is on backend. We still have UI state. But honestly, I don't really see people all that often to write unit tests for view state actually changes. So
yeah. I don't think people that often even test their reframe logic. And I always ask people that heavily use reframe, oh, do you write tests for it? And no, this is the current answer that I'm getting. I really want to see a good example of a big reframe application with
yeah,
tests for their events logic.
yeah,
In Ship Clojure currently, what I have is I wrote a schema for the entire state that can possibly be on the front end, and in development there's a watch for the
yeah.
schema to check if the schema is respected, and it currently works out very well. I like this schema based checking during development. I have a similar arrangement set up for VoiceFN for the application that does real time voice AI
Okay,
agents. So yeah.
okay, great. So I would like to thank you. And I have the last question, and it is, how can people support you?
Yeah, so people can go and check out Ship Clojure at shipclojure.com. And if they think it would be valuable for them, they could go ahead and buy any one of those pricing options. And yeah, that's mainly it. I will keep updating it. I'm seriously looking into Replicant again by Christian Johansson, and
Yeah,
I like it. Coming back to the discussion we had about reframe, I like a lot this thing where all of your UI is just dumb and
yeah.
all of your logic is separated so that you have a separation of concerns and everything is testable. So
Okay,
something like that might come in the future, but yeah, that's how people can support me.
fabulous. So thank you. Have a great day, and hopefully again in the future we will
Yeah,
speak again.
gladly. It was a pleasure, Jiri. Thank you for having me.
All right. Have a great day. Bye.
See you. Bye bye.